Here we are in one of my kind of favorite things that happen in the Bible because it's just kind of strange.
What, water into wine?
Water into wine.
Pretty weird, isn't it?
It is weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it starts off here. He says, 3 days later, he being John writing, 3 days later there was a wedding in the village of Cana in Galilee, and Jesus' mother was there, and the disciples were there. It's strange that he has just gotten the disciples and then they all turn up to a wedding. That's a very different culture to ours where you have to have invitations. Sometimes you can't even bring your children. You know, this seems
plus
to be...
one sometimes are allowed.
Yeah, this seems to be all in.
Yeah, very much the culture. And I would think, though, that there was planning around the weddings. Word got out, but they were planned for a long time because, you know, you got a long betrothal, but it was a big event. We think ours were big events. They were pretty big events in those days. They don't just last for one day.
No, it was like a week,
wasn't it? It's a week of celebration in one form or another, yeah.
And tell me, how important was wine in this celebration?
Oh, I think anything in Jewish culture. Wine is significant in Jewish culture for joy and celebration and life, probably other metaphors that it uses in the Old Testament as well. So I think the inclusion of wine signifies joy in life. So if you're going to have a wedding, you're going to need wine because that's symbolic of what you're trying to celebrate. This couple are entering into joy in life.
And what would happen if that wine ran out?
I think it would almost be like a bad omen.
A bad omen for the newly married
for
people?
the newly married couple. It would almost carry spiritual significance that this is not a good sign. It does not bode well for this marriage.
Wow, so it would have affected the people being married, the parents-in-law. It would have been seen as disgraceful, I guess, and shameful.
In a culture where honour and shame is so important, yes, it would have been shameful.
Yeah, and if you run out of wine early in the day, we don't know what time of day this was.
We don't know when this is.
But it seems that the party is clearly not close to being over.
No, it would appear not. No, it's early on, which is going to create, like you say, shame for the family. People are going to be talking about this wedding for all the wrong reasons for years to come. Can you believe they ran out of wine at Mary's wedding?
Yeah, well, not Mary's wedding.
Well, no, not.
But Mary seems to be very involved.
Yeah, no, I'm not talking about Mary's wedding. The girl could have been
Mary.
Mary.
Oh, the Mary. Okay, could have been another Mary.
Hypothetically, just pulled a name, a Christian, a Jewish name out of my head.
But Jesus' mother is there, Mary, and she seems to be very involved and very worried about it.
Probably, maybe family. This is not far from Nazareth, this town, so maybe there's extended family that she's engaged in here. This is wouldn't expect Mary to be involved in that to that degree if she didn't at least know this family fairly well.
All right.
The fact that Jesus brought his disciples, I think it's pretty reasonable to assume that it was a close family friend or extended family member, that sort of thing.
Yeah, okay. And they're all hanging around, having a great time, but then Mary gets worried. She notices the wine is running low.
Yep.
So she runs over to Jesus and she says, they're just about out of wine. And Jesus responds, "Is that any of our business, mother, yours or mine? This isn't my time. Don't push me." But then she just says, whatever he tells you, do it. That's a really interesting statement. Like, she knew that he'd done no miracles at this point.
Yeah.
This is his first
Don't
miracle.
push me, Mum.
Yeah. It sounds like a loving response, I think.
Yeah.
Not nasty.
Not a nasty response, yeah. Because the problem is we don't know, there's so much we don't know about the wording. What was the tone? Because I always think of Jesus as saying, "Oh, Mum, come on, wink, wink."
Yeah.
I think like, "My time isn't here, Mum, wink, wink."
Yeah.
As if to say, "Go and do what you need to do, Mum."
Yes. So this isn't my time to become the person that I'm meant to be.
Yeah, I think that's probably an element of truth in that.
Okay.
Yeah, that I'm not yet going to become the king, the Messiah. That time has not yet come.
Oh, or is John alluding to his time isn't the miracle, that his time is actually the resurrection?
Yeah,
is he actually making that statement?
Maybe that's more pointing to that final fulfillment of who Jesus is.
Okay.
I don't know. I think scholars would argue about what he meant when he said, "My time has not yet come." Other gospel, I think maybe John's gospel will talk about it when he walked through the crowd, or might have been the synoptic gospel will say he walked through the crowd because his time had not yet come. And in that context, it's always referring to his time to be crowned as king had not yet come.
You just reminded me, I just saw this crazy Instagram thing, which is relevant here. It's a person speaking saying, Jesus was a carpenter for 30 years, but all that time he knew that he was meant to be somebody different. Like his ministry, he knew his ministry was coming, but he needed the 30 years hard work to become the person that he was going to be in that moment. Does that make sense?
Preparation.
Preparation.
Sounds
yeah.
like every man or woman that's ever done anything for God.
Yeah. And so he knew my time isn't come. He was still being prepared.
Yep.
But he was
I mean, he gathered his disciples by this point. So he was starting his mission. And as we're about to see, this is a significant event that's going to put their disciples are about to put their trust in him. They're going to see something in him as a result of this miracle.
Yeah.
So that's why I think he might be kind of a bit tongue-in-cheek with my time has not yet come. Because I don't think Jesus would have been obligated or forced into doing anything he didn't want to do, even by his mum. So if Jesus has done something, it's intentional.
But there is a concern here, and out of compassion,
Yes.
I think he acts.
Yeah, I think that's right. It shows his heart for not wanting to bring shame to this family member and the husband and wife and newlyweds and so on. So he does seem to act from a sense of compassion.
Because the host family don't ever really interact with him in this scene, do they?
No. It's only the master, his mum, and the master of the banquet, who's like...
And the servants.
And the servants, yes, correct.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay. The servants are key in this part.
They are indeed.
All right. So she says, do whatever he tells you to the servants. And we know that there are 6 stoneware pots that were there that were used by the Jews for the ritual washing, and each held about 20 to 30 gallons of water.
That's a lot of water.
That's heaps of water. And Jesus ordered the servants.
Crop of wine, that amount.
Yeah, yeah. He says to them, fill them with the pots with water, and they fill them to the brim. Can you imagine the servants here? They're so busy at this wedding. They run off their feet, and then they're like, this dude here is telling us to carry these huge, what are they, pots?
Yeah.
And
30. There's 6 of them, and let's assume they're holding 20 gallons each. That's 80 litres. So 6 eighths is 480 litres. This is the conservative measurement. That's half a ton of wine.
Wow.
Half a ton of water that they've had to get from somewhere out of the town well and pour it into these.
Yeah.
Hats off to the servants, I say.
I say, yeah. And if I was one of those servants, I would have been very annoyed. I would have done this begrudgingly.
Absolutely.
For sure. Because I had heaps of other things to do, and now I'm doing this. And I think that's really funny.
It's really funny.
Yeah.
I reckon good on them for doing that. I mean,
Yes.
in the middle of the busyness of the festival.
But they go above and beyond because they fill it to the brim.
Yeah, right to the brim.
Yeah, it's almost like, well, you say us do this, then we're going to, I don't know, prove you something. And
we'll show you.
We'll show you, fill it to
Yeah.
the brim. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And Jesus says, now fill your pitchers and take them to the host. And they do that. And then when the host tastes the water, that's when it becomes wine.
Yep.
Right.
It would appear that that's the point at which it becomes wine. Yep.
But he didn't know. The host didn't know what had happened, but the servants, of course, knew. So who's the miracle for here? Who sees the miracle?
The miracle is only for the servants and maybe his disciples who's watching the whole thing.
Yeah. So who's growing in this moment?
Oh, the servants and the disciples.
Yes.
Not the master of the banquet.
Not the
the
master.
family. They are oblivious.
You're totally oblivious to everything going on.
Oh, very good thought. Tell me more.
Well, I don't really have any other thought.
I'm wondering if that shows that, Jesus is not going to out anyone. He's going to cover over their shame completely. Like, they're not going to even know. They don't even need to know that they ran out of wine.
No.
They just have no idea, and good for them that they don't know. Jesus loves them enough to go, you don't need to know that I did this miracle. I'm not trying to big note myself here. But so once again, it's back to that sign, and this sign is pointing to something.
Yeah.
Which is going to be, in a moment we're going to see, his disciples put their trust in him.
They did put their trust in him. And that would have been shocking too.
Oh, yeah.
And this man has control over water.
Water.
That's significant.
And
in
that
John.
will come up multiple times in our conversations in the Gospel of John
Yes.
around Jesus and water.
Yeah, and let me just read the response about the host. He shouts out to everybody. He says, everybody I know begins with their finest wines, and after the guests have had their fill in the cheap stuff. I don't know if I read that properly. They begin with the fine wines.
Then when people are drunk,
don't
don't worry too much. They
Yes.
don't notice it tastes so much then.
But Jesus has done the opposite.
Yep.
You've saved the best till now. This act in Cana was the first sign Jesus gave, the first glimpse of his glory, and the disciples believed in him, which is what you said.
Yep. And that was the point. First sign revealing his glory. This is something tangible Remember, he said, "You're going to see the Son of Man ascending, the glory of God ascending upon me." Sorry, you're going to see angels ascending upon me, the glory of God. This is one of those moments.
Do you think there's anything else going on here?
I'm sure there is, but nothing comes to mind. Tell me more. What do you think? What are you thinking?
Well, tell me about the pots, this ritual.
Ritual washing pots.
Yeah.
So they were used as a form of hand washing that you would do daily as a ritual cleansing before you ate a meal, before you went through the emotions. It was a sign of an outward. It was an outward sign that was supposed to signify an inward cleansing.
So Jesus knew exactly that? He knew all of that?
He would have known that, yep.
So why is he telling them to fill them with water?
You're a very good question asker. Why is he telling him? Okay, so the water is being, I'm thinking in real time here, the water is being cleansed, it's a pot that's used for cleansing. Jesus is filling it up. So I guess their assumption is that there's going to have to be some kind of cleansing take place. Is that what you
Yeah.
Yeah, that was what they thought would have been going to happen with them? They would have no reason to assume they were going to be ever used for wine.
No, never.
Mm-hmm.
So let's think about Jesus uses the old, what they recognize,
Yep.
and does something completely new
Okay.
with it.
He repurposes an old for a new.
Yes, he does.
Keep going.
It's pointing to the old covenant,
Mm-hmm.
now the new covenant.
So in the old, it's almost like, quote unquote, new wine in old wineskins almost.
Yeah.
So he's putting new wine into something, breathing new wine into something that had an old purpose and an old meaning.
Yeah. Or put it this way, he is using what they recognize, but he is going to repurpose it for a brand new thing that they don't ultimately recognize. Like the host doesn't recognize the miracle, but he is presenting there is newness. There is going to be something different that I'm going to do in my ministry.
And I like the fact that it's linked to the old.
Yeah.
I always think about that. It's not that we need to recognize that the old points forward to the fulfillment in Jesus. It's not separate. You don't separate out the new covenant from the old covenant. The old covenant was always supposed to point to the new covenant.
Yeah. And that's what he's done in this new moment.
Yeah. I like that. It's good, Jeannie.
It's significant.
You led me there. I wasn't sure where you were going, but I get it. Yep.
It is. And the fact that the host doesn't recognize the miracle, yet the believers recognize, or his disciples recognize something hugely significant.
Yep.
That Jesus can take an old pot and make it absolutely new, and he has saved the best for last. So while we have the old covenant, which has been wonderful,
it's done its purpose, but the new covenant is the best wine.
Yeah.
Ah, very nice.
See what John's done there?
I do see. That's very clever writing.
It is clever.
Yeah. And it's very clever on Jesus' part that he's instigated this whole process.
Yeah, and also it pays to wait too. You know, the best is yet to come.
The best is yet to come.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, always having that attitude.
And another thing, water obeys him.
Yep.
Why? Why would John put water in there?
I think water has both positive and negative connotations in the scriptures. So water has the connotation of being chaotic, the chaotic waters of the book of Genesis. So in that sense, water is seen as the place of evil or chaos or unrest. So when Jesus is going to walk on the water in later chapters, it's going to be really obvious. He's going to be saying, I rule over the chaos. Also, still water has this picture of being used in cleansing and all that kind of stuff and refreshing. David says you'll lay down beside still waters. I think there may be a little bit more going on here because he's actually he's mixing metaphors. He's mixing water and turning it into wine. So there's more going on than a chaos thing. I don't think we need to think of Jesus as mastery over chaos in this story. It's more taking something that could cleanse the heart, could cleanse the hands, and he's showing it has a deeper meaning now. The new wine will bring new life and cleanse your heart and cleanse your spirit.
Yes, exactly. Because I was just about to say, I like to think of it like I am the old water in that.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
The old water. But Jesus, he has the ability to transform my old life into something that is more valuable, into something that is completely changed within.
I wonder if that's
Does that make sense?
Yes, and I wonder if that's where Brooke Littlewood got her words. Make me a vessel, make me an offering, make me whatever you want me to be. I came here with nothing, but all you've given me, Jesus, make new wine out of me.
Yeah, it could be, yeah.
I wonder if, that's a really good lyrical representation of what you've just said.
Yeah, so it's the religious washing turning into new
something new wine, new life, new joy.
It's a transformation taking place.
And the value of that wine is now far more valuable than the value of the water that was in there beforehand.
Yeah, he saved the best for last.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
It's good, Jeannie.
Yes. And that reminds me of John 10:10 here, that he came to change us. He came so that we will have life in fullness. And that's what he's giving them at this wedding.
Yes.
This is fullness for everybody involved, for me personally as I become new wine. And he has restored, without the bride people knowing it, he has restored their dignity.
Their dignity, their honour, and they've been able to enjoy. He's brought joy to them. He's enhanced that. And they're not even aware. I wonder how often we're not even aware. We go through life completely unaware that the Master has given us new wine, and we're none the wiser that we'd actually run out.
Yeah. I was just thinking, I wonder if there were people after this wedding going, hey, dude, you know that wine?
Yeah.
Where'd you get
Where'd
it
you
from?
get that?
I'd like some more of that. And they go, well, look at that guy.
Yeah. I wonder. Yeah, I wonder. That would be good. Go follow him. He's the one who did it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then his whole blood as wine thing later on.
Yes, yep. Yeah. Wine gets mixed into the mix as well. Yep.
Yeah.
There's lots of metaphorical crossovers in John's gospel.
Totally are.
He mixes them all around.
Yeah, okay. We'll move on here because we just will.
Okay, so we've been in Cana.
We've been in Cana.
Which is up in the north, near Nazareth, up in the north of the country.
Okay. And
next thing, we're in Jerusalem.
We're in Jerusalem, which is strange because other gospels have Jesus in Jerusalem towards the end of his life, but John is bringing him into Jerusalem like bangs at the start of his ministry.
Yes.
Why is he doing that?
Well, scholars will argue about whether or not this event that we're about to see, the clearing of the temple, because John has it happening at the beginning of his ministry. The other synoptic gospels have it happening at the end of his ministry and the beginning of his last week. Which one is true? I suspect that the accurate one is the triumphal entry, Passion Week, and the cleansing of the temple, the one that we celebrate as part of, Palm Sunday and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
I think that was intentional. That was more likely that the others are more historically timeline accurate. But John is allowed to be creative. You just said that. And I think he's creatively taking a story that happened, probably happened later in Jesus' ministry, but inserting it into the beginning of Jesus' ministry to prove a point.
So he's telling a story. He's leading us in, drawing us in.
He's not worried about chronology.
No.
John's gospel is not worried about chronology to the degree that, and look, to be fair, even the other gospels aren't as worried about chronology as a modern historian would be. We have to wrestle with the fact that they don't see taking stories and moving them around in the timeline as lying. We would say, well, you don't do that. If you're a good historian, you don't do that. They don't see it that way because the chronology in ancient cultures, this is not just Jewish culture, this is all ancient cultures. Ancient historians, Herodotus, Josephus, they're not as worried about chronology as we are. They just are telling a story. So we have to be okay with that. So we have to go, okay, the sub-scholars can't get their head around that because they think, Jesus must have cleansed the temple twice, once at the start and once at the end. Well, maybe he did, but I don't think that matters. John has chosen to tell this story at this point for a purpose, which I assume we'll see as we go through.
He's pointing.
It's a sign. It's a sign.
Yeah.
That's right.
He's arguing his messiahship.
Yes.
Really.
Exactly. And that's why it's here at the early. John's using it to establish his messiahship early in the story rather than at the end like the other gospels do.
And this is an astonishing scene, really.
Oh, yeah.
So Passover is the big time of the year. Everybody around the Jewish nation, even further, have come into the temple to bring their sacrifices. And what's Passover about, just quickly, for people who don't know?
People who don't know. So this celebrates the time of the Exodus when they were in slavery. Jewish people were in slavery and God rescued them by them killing the Passover lamb and putting its blood on their door. And so when the angel of death passed over and the plague of the firstborn happened in Egypt, they were protected from that and then ultimately led through the desert, through the Exodus, and ultimately to God's promise. So it became celebrated at this time and as the primary act of God's deliverance for the Jewish people.
And they have to go through water, don't they?
Yes, they go
There's
through
the
water.
Red Sea.
Yep,
There's
that's right.
that
There's
part.
more metaphors mixed in there. They
Yes.
have to go through the water of the Red Sea. Yep.
All right, okay. So Jesus walks into the temple and he finds it doesn't look exactly like he would want it to look, that it should look, right?
Yes, it's what's happening in there is not the Father's plan for the temple.
There's loan sharks in there. There's
Loan
people
sharks.
selling
I like
cattle
that.
and
Good
sheep.
on you, Eugene
Yeah.
Peterson.
Yeah.
Loan sharks is exactly the problem.
Yep, people selling things and basically people getting ripped off.
Yes. If the selling wasn't a problem, it was the exchange rate that the selling was
okay.
taking place at.
Because you had to provide a sacrifice when you
Yes.
came here. So people were selling that in the temple, but they were marking up the prices.
Severely.
And doing some dodgy business.
Yes.
And so Jesus here, this lovely man that just changed water into wine, I imagine smiling at that lovely wedding, suddenly creates a whip.
Yeah. Different side of Jesus, isn't it?
It actually says he puts together a whip out of strips of leather, and then he chases these loan sharks and people out of the temple, stampeding the sheep and cattle, upending the tables and spilling coins left and right.
How to win friends and influence people.
I mean, what a scene.
He certainly influenced a few people.
What
I don't think
a
you have many friends.
Yeah.
Yeah, what a scene. Imagine it. You imagine the noise, the raucous tables, the coins are flying everywhere.
Yeah.
Sheep are going, meh, running
yeah.
off all over the place.
I would have loved to see a child in this moment. You know, kids just looking stunned, like
Yeah, true.
they're bored out of their mind. They're back at the Passover again. It is interesting, but what's going on
Yeah,
now?
and now
is
mum's
just-
taking him. Let's just get away from that
Yeah.
strange man.
He would have seemed like a terrorist
He would have
in a
seemed
way.
crazy. Yeah.
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 He's like causing problems. And
It certainly is.
and this, John says here, Jesus says, stop turning my Father's house into a shopping mall.
That's probably the problem. There is, people can think, oh, there was a problem with selling. He's not saying that. It was
No.
the high inflation rate of charge that they were doing.
It was the intention of greed
It was
behind
greed.
it.
Yeah, they needed to bring a sheep. They couldn't bring their sheep all the way from Galilee, so they would bring their money and they would buy the sheep when they get there. The sheep should have been worth, 5 shekels, but instead they find that,
Yeah.
they're marked up and they're being charged 15 shekels for the same sheep.
They were
that sort of
ripping
thing.
off the vulnerable. Those
Yes.
people who were wanting to be cleansed and present their
Yeah.
offering before God were being ripped off. The
Exactly.
vulnerable people.
The vulnerable people.
That's what Jesus is angry
He
about.
certainly is.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. And it says here, in this moment, that's when the disciples remembered. Sorry, this moment leads the disciples to remember later on
yes.
the scripture, zeal for your house consumes me. Who said that?
One of the prophets. I have to find out who it is. Have you got it in your notes? It is. It must be David. It's Psalm 69, verse 9. Concern for God's house will be my undoing, it says in that version, but zeal for your house will consume me. Psalm 69, verse 9, according to, which I assume is a psalm of David.
All right. That makes sense.
Yep.
David saying
David
that.
was very zealous about God's house. He had planned to build the whole thing. He didn't build it, but his son built it, but he had it all rolled out, ready to go. Yep.
And in this moment, the Jews, the religious elite, the leaders were very upset, and they asked him, what credentials can you present to justify this? And Jesus answers, tear down this temple, and in 3 days I'll put it back together.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine that in the moment. It doesn't make any sense. Like, what are
Yes,
your credentials?
What are
In
your
3
credentials?
days, I'll
3
tear-
days, I'll tear it down. I'll put it back together. Yeah.
It's a threat, isn't it? It seems like a threat. Well, it does to them, the Jews, in that moment.
Yes. Oh, they have no idea what he's talking about.
No.
No. Clearly, they think he's talking about the temple that he's standing in. You
Yeah,
know,
okay.
Destroy this. If you
Yes.
destroy this temple, I'll rebuild it.
That's why it says here they were indignant. It took 46 years to build the temple, and you're going to rebuild it in 3 days. And John tells us here, in a lovely way.
Yeah. By the way, listener.
Yes, but
As you're listening.
Jesus was talking about his body as the temple. Later, after he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered he had said this. Then they put 2 and 2 together and believed what was written in the scripture.
Yeah. So it's a resurrection theme here, the third day.
So it seems he believed what was written in scripture about Jesus. So other verses point to this, don't they?
Pretty much the whole Old Testament points to the Messiah.
The whole thing. Should we
Yeah.
go through it right now?
Not right now. But that's the point, is it was all pointing forward to Jesus fulfilling God's kingdom, bringing new creation on the earth, resurrection, new creation. And that's what they didn't see, hadn't seen. The Jews couldn't see that it was pointing to him.
So what's Jesus doing in this moment?
Well, he's pointing forward to, he's giving them a prophetic word about 3 days later, I'm going to bring new life. So he's pretty much saying, if he's just rolled the temple over, he's pretty much saying everything that this place represents, he's supposed to represent, you have defiled that. Instead of this being a place, it says, how dare you turn my father's house into a den of thieves, other versions say. So it's like, how dare you take something that's supposed to be holy, supposed to be available for everyone to come and experience God. It's the place that thin space between heaven and earth, and you are putting barriers in people, and you are using this opportunity for your own gain that is abhorrent to God. And he is going to then, he's acted out kind of like a mini destruction of that, which will ultimately lead to the destruction of his own body, the death of his own body, which will ultimately lead to the fulfillment of the new creation, the resurrection of his temple, the resurrection, that the temple will be fulfilled. The fulfillment of what the physical temple is will be fulfilled in him, because he's going to sit on the Mount of Olives at the end of his week, at the end of the Passion Week, and he's going to have this big conversation with his disciples about the temple. He's going to say, this whole thing looks glorious now, but it isn't fulfilling what it's supposed to fulfill for all these reasons, like this greed and all this sort of stuff. It's actually going to be destroyed. And why is it going to be destroyed? Because it was a sign. The temple was a sign pointing to me. I'm the true temple. And now he's sort of acting that out. So he's taking the point off the physical temple and putting it onto himself.
Is this a heaven touches earth moment? Like the water and wine was? Is this that?
I definitely think it's a sign. Yes, it's a sign pointing the physical temple to the true temple. The heaven touches down moment.
Old to the new.
Yes.
The old water to the new wine.
Yep.
Kind of thing.
Yep. And John's gospel, we didn't talk about this. You skimmed over it, but my version doesn't have it. But some gospels, right at the beginning of chapter 2, says on the third day he went to Cana.
Yes, it does.
So, and here he says, I'm destroying it at 3 days. My gospel says the next day, but in the notes it says some versions say the third day. So I definitely think that John is trying to point this whole thing forward by linking the third day to this resurrection, this new life, new creation.
Yeah, I get that. That makes sense. I did wonder why he said the third day. Why was that important?
I think you have to see it as a literary device that's used, because he's not worried about time. He's just jumped ahead 3 years in an instant. So I think it's a literary device he's using, which is linking both stories, the water wine story with the temple story.
It's very clever.
Very clever writing.
Yeah, it is. And then he ends it here in these last few verses. But during that time he was in Jerusalem, those days of the Passover feast, many people noticed the signs he was displaying, and seeing, they pointed straight to God and trusted their lives to him.
I like it.
I like that too. But then this next statement makes me wonder what is going on. It says, but Jesus didn't entrust his life to them. He knew them inside and out, knew how untrustworthy they were. He didn't need any help in seeing right through them.
Okay.
What? What's he saying? What's going on?
I think it's an observation about not giving himself over to the accolades of the people, which can be fickle. Jesus knows that human heart is fickle. Later on, we'll read about the feeding of the 5,000 and how they come back and all they want to do is get another feed. So there's a fickleness in our human heart that Jesus knows if he gives himself to and trusts himself to that, he'll have a crowd one day and no one the next. So he's not going to let that get in the way of his mission.
He's certainly building reputation, isn't he? He's
come
in, destroyed the temple. Yeah.
Some of it good and some of it not good.
So he talks about other signs here. So do you think this is meaning miracles?
Yeah, it doesn't say, does it?
No.
No. Other than at the end of John's gospel, he'll say, Jesus did lots of other things, miracles that are not recorded in this book. I suppose if they were all recorded, there would be not enough room in all the books of the world to contain them. John has carefully curated the signs he wanted to tell the story. So no doubt Jesus is doing other miracles. Other gospels talk about him walking around healing everyone. So there's other things that are happening, but John has just selected these.
And he's showing us here that this Jesus knew them inside out. Jesus
Yes.
knew people.
He knows people.
He knows people, yet he still decides to continue on with his ministry
Yeah.
and head to the ultimate Passover.
Yes, that's right. Even though he had good reason not to, it was his love for us despite our fickleness.
And like he in the story with the wine, it's like he desires to bring redemption to people, doesn't he? He was so compassionate in that wine moment. He's compassionate here, even though he doesn't need help in seeing people. He knows them inside and out. He has compassion for people.
Yep.
He wants to set people right. He wants to transform people.
I like that. Yeah, he will overlook our frailties, our poor choices because he loves us.
And I was just thinking then, even though he's destroyed the temple here, everything's a mess, it is ultimately about bringing dignity back, isn't it, to the temple. And the temple temple is also ourselves, you know.
Yes, Paul will pick it up and say, now you, the church, are the temple and each of you individuals are the temple. He'll do that in Corinthians, building upon this thought that Jesus is the heaven and earth temple touchdown point.
Heaven touchdown. Chaos to dignity.
Yes, chaos to dignity. I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
the oil of joy.
The oil of
instead
joy.
Sorrow.
The what of sorrow?
Instead of sorrow.
Oh,
the oil of joy instead of sorrow.
I thought you said the sword of sorrow. I was like,
No.
what?
The oil of joy instead of sorrow.
Yeah, that's all I have for that chapter at this point. We would come back to it again and again, I'm sure.
Yeah, we'll keep digging.
Yeah.
There's plenty of digging
Keep
in John.
digging.
All right, let's go to the next chapter.